human rights education with a special focus on children's rights education. And we're based in Belgium.
Kalin, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Yes, I didn't like, watching myself on the screen. That's why I turned off the camera.
Sorry, it was just to show. Would you like to introduce yourself? Yeah.
Yes. So I work at an organization which is called the Intercultural Institute, based in Timișoara, Romania, and we work for now over 20 years on different activities related to education for democratic citizenship and intercultural education, mainly, including also human rights education and other related areas. And also including different activities related to intercultural relations, minorities, including a lot of work on Roma issues. And so, yeah, we have a lot of activities that we have been doing with the Council of Europe. And for several years we had contacts with this network, and we are recently become a member, and we look forward to having a stronger involvement in the net.
Perfect. Catherine, would you like to continue?
Yes, my name is Catherine Gathercole. I'm the director of a small education charity called Tide Global Learning. We've worked with teachers and educators in the UK for many years, promoting understanding of global issues and development awareness. My role as one of the people who's involved in doing some research on behalf of DEEEP, so working with Amy, but also with a colleague, Harmjan Fricker, looking in particular at developing some ideas around monitoring of transformative education with respect to the new Sustainable Development Goals. So my role in this meeting will mainly be to take notes and to write up and feed back into the research, that ongoing research process. So the email came from myself and Harmjan and Amy. That's it.
Nice. Perfect. Thank you very much. Amy, would you like to continue?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Amy Skinner. I'm the research officer at DEEEP. DEEEP is the European Development Education Platform. Development education is also known as global education or global learning in many countries. So, and we're currently running this research into education for global citizenship, which we consider to include all sorts of, various approaches to education, including human rights education. So we're really pleased to have the chance to discuss some of these issues with you today, and and hearing your views and perspectives on this topic. So now that we've just had a quick round of introductions, perhaps I'll just recap a little bit, give a bit of context and background to the research that we're doing, and then we can start with the questions. We have about 5 questions we'd like to discuss with you today. DEEEP is actually at the moment involved in the discussions that are going on around the educational goal that is being set for the post-2015 agenda. And this goal is looking not just at access to education, but also at ensuring quality education. And there's a particular part of the goal that's been proposed at the moment, which is about education for global citizenship. I don't know if, Ramon, you can put the goal on the, if you can share the screen so we can all see the proposed goal.
So you should be able to see it now.
Yeah, can everybody see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a proposal at the moment. It's that by 2030 We ensure that all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So it's quite wordy at the moment, but this is what we're working with. And as you all know, setting these goals also requires determining certain targets and indicators to evaluate the extent to which they are actually being achieved. But monitoring frameworks are quite controversial in terms of education, as you know, and they often tend to be quite limited in their focusing on academic skills or numeracy and literacy targets, rather than capturing the kind of broader effects that education is having. And so that's what we're really interested in this research, is looking at ways in which we can propose alternative frameworks for understanding and capturing the learning that's taking place. And which can really look at the transformative nature of education. Because, if you can move to the next slide, Ramon. As education for global citizenship, in terms of this research, we understand it as being based on an understanding of the purpose of education as going beyond the acquisition of just knowledge and cognitive skills to actually transforming the way that people think and act individually and collectively. And so what we're really interested in exploring is whether we can create new frameworks which actually do justice to this kind of learning, which can actually capture this transformation, this change that is taking place. And if so, what kind of targets or indicators could be established? And so what we're doing in this research is focusing at this stage on getting feedback and responses with regards to this from practitioners from all around the world, practitioners in human rights education, in popular education, intercultural education, and really getting their perspective on these issues. And then once we've collected those responses, we're going to produce a summary, and then we're going to feed that summary back to wider stakeholders, so policymakers and other interested parties, to get their feedback. And then the aim is by January 2015 to hopefully come up with a description of a monitoring framework that actually embodies the philosophy, the values, and the transformative nature of this type of education, and possibly suggest some indicators or targets that would be useful for practitioners, and which could be included as part of this goal, the Sustainable Development Goal on education. So that's just a very short introduction to what we're doing. I hope that it's clear, but please, as we go along, if there are any questions that you have, please feel free to just ask, or any clarifications. But otherwise, I propose that we just get started. Catherine will be taking notes, as she said, and then we'll circulate these notes with you afterwards, just for you to have a look through and to check, and also perhaps add some further comments or ideas, because we don't have very long today, so I guess it will just be kind of just initiating the first discussion, really. So the first question that we have is, where do you see the gaps in current thinking and practice around monitoring, the way in which education transforms the way people think and act individually and collectively? I don't know who wants to go first, or please feel free to just chip in whether you have any ideas. So what we're looking at is, as I said, a lot of frameworks are very limited in the scope of what they're measuring and how they understand education. We're trying to move to a more innovative framework which captures the broader elements of learning. Where do you see the gaps in possibly moving towards this idea? What have been your experiences if you've used any type of monitoring frameworks, and what were their limitations? Yeah, Fiona?
Yeah. I think one of the main gaps for me as a practitioner is that most monitoring frameworks are geared towards monitoring or measuring knowledge and skills, and I saw in your goal that it's also catered toward knowledge and skills, which is really unfortunate because for us in human rights education we try to transform at different dimensions, and it goes, yeah, of course you have knowledge, but that's all the way at the bottom actually. Understanding, which is different, skills, behavior, what people do, attitudes, how they are in life, and conviction, which is the most difficult level, but research shows that you really need to have this conviction in order to have all the other dimensions as well, from an intrinsic point of view, if I make myself clear. So what we are trying to do now, but it's all in a very experimental phase, is making or drafting indicators or drafting a new monitoring framework actually to measure all those dimensions. Yeah. Whereas, of course, for the conviction level, it's very risky because we don't want to move education to propaganda territory. But yeah, apparently, if you don't have the conviction, you can show your behavior something, but it will not be internalized. So that's we want to measure whether or not people have internalized what we try to teach them. So I think that's yeah, and you know, knowledge is easiest to measure. Everything that's really easy to measure really gets a disproportionate emphasis or value, I think. So that is really
yeah,
a pity.
yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. So you're looking at you're looking at creating a framework to be able to assess all of these different elements, and how
Yes, actually
how far are you going?
Yeah, we're in the process. We have some draft versions, but they're in Dutch. Actually, just for the school level, so it's informal education, well, primary school level. At this point, we're making something for the teachers, so that's more at the training level. At the same time, we have some questionnaires also for the learners, for children themselves, but the most detailed one right now is the one for teachers. It has been tested twice now, and we're in the final stages actually of making a version that we want to use at a more at a broader scale.
Okay. And can you, I mean, what kind of tools or ways of assessing, for example, convictions have you been discussing or come up with?
Yeah, the thing is, this is for a particular project we're working on. We call it children's rights schools. Well, it's not really English, but it's something like UNICEF's rights respecting schools, but a little even more general, more even broader, I guess. So what's really important to us is that people can self-assess. So we're making something right now that's some kind of automated. Well, no. Just a simple questionnaire online, and if you fill it out, automatically the result is calculated, and it. I don't know how to say this. It gives a few action suggestions. You see, because we've made up 3 profiles of in this case the teachers. For learners, we're still working on that, but for the teachers, so we have without really naming them like that because we don't want to turn it into some kind of hierarchy, but you have basic level, the enrichment level, and expert level actually, and then we measure what they know and are convinced about human rights in general, human rights education, and then depending on which at which level you get, automatically a couple of suggestions are made in terms of action, what you can do next, something like that. And then for conviction, so because it's so important that it's completely possible to do a self-assessment without, you know, external people coming in and conducting semi-structured interviews and all that, which would be very interesting as well, but just not that practical for teachers. They just fill out something. We just have this written questionnaire with some questions. I can give an example if you give me a second. That polls for conviction. For instance, I believe, because that's a conviction level. Wait, I have to translate. I believe that the children's rights, well, this is not the best question, but the easiest one to translate. I believe that the children's rights culture in our school will make our school a better school, because there's a link between children's rights education and quality education. Do you believe that? And of course, this conviction will be tested, so to say, in other questions, polling for understanding and knowledge. Because if you don't have the knowledge, it's easy to say I think it should be like this. But yeah, so that's what we're working on right now.
Oh, right. That's really interesting. So if I understand correctly, it's a self-assessment framework for teachers, for the practitioners.
Yeah, right now, yeah.
Right, okay. And then you're also working on developing one which teachers can use to assess the pupils' learning.
Yeah, actually, it will be some kind of peer assessment. So children will do it among themselves. Yes, of course, but the thing, it takes longer because we want to create this, co-create this with children themselves, of course, and they're actually making the indicators, like when do I feel I really my school is a children's rights school. So that's what we're working on, and it takes more time.
Right. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Caroline, do you have anything you would like to add? Any experiences from your field of work?
Yes, I could add some things. First, maybe about some attempts that we had to use some instruments, particularly to assess also changes in attitudes and issues which are related to values and convictions. And we found it very challenging because of several reasons. Of course, our intention was also to rely on self-assessment, but this has sometimes several risks. For example, related to the fact that there is it's very hard to control issues related to effect of social desirability. I mean, there is a very powerful tendency to answer as you think that you are expected to answer. And also there are sometimes big differences in terms of the way the power of this kind of influence. Also affected by the cultural environment. If you are in an environment which encourages self-questioning and critical thinking and you know, openly speaking about various issues, you are probably more likely to assess some things like the ones you mentioned in a more honest way, so to say, than if you are in a culture which doesn't favor expression of real ideas and favors conformism, for example. Then we found it also risky related to the issue of self-assessment, related to this this research that has proven that I can give you all the references also, if you maybe you know, research showing that people who have less competence are less able to self-assess their competence. And then sometimes when you try to measure the impact of educational activities, you could end up with people assessing themselves as at a lower level than before the start of the educational process, which doesn't mean that there is a negative impact, but that means that there is an increased awareness of the things they do not know, maybe also. Then I and maybe at some point I can share some ideas and instruments and tools and methods that we try to use in this, but we are not totally happy with what we have. But there are some interesting theoretical models behind which we try to adapt to our context, and some elements were quite useful. Then I wanted to share that I am now part of a working group at the Council of Europe, which is trying to develop a set of the description of competencies that are needed for democratic culture and intercultural dialogue. And I also want to emphasize this because in our activities we also try to put together elements related to democracy, human rights, and intercultural issues because we believe they should be seen as connected. And in this framework, our reference is also similar to what you mentioned earlier, but we don't talk about convictions, we talk about values, then attitudes, skills, knowledge and understanding, and we have a big discussion about dispositions in relation to the use of the competencies in action. And it's still work in progress. I cannot share for the moment any document on this, but we are working on that, and I think there will be first public documents available anywhere before the end of this year. And I'd be very happy to share and have feedback from all of you on this. Then a colleague of ours has been involved in work also with another department of the Council of Europe on the youth department on developing indicators for educational activities that have intercultural dialogue as among their goals. And I think they have developed an interesting framework which can be used also for assessment. It's meant to be used to assess educational programs and training programs, for example. But there are maybe interesting things from the perspective of the question raised here, and that I think I share soon a final version of that. Well, I would stop here for now.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you very much. That's really interesting. I think you raised some really important points there. The reservations about self-assessment as the method, the fact that there's they're quite loaded questions that are often asked, and people feel they have to respond in a certain way. Fiona, you've written in the chat box that you also recognise this, but in order to tackle it, you've tried to ask them if there's some kind of materialization of what they say, so what they've done, like an action. How did that, did that help to clarify or to resolve this issue? Fiona?
Yeah, of course, as the instrument has been tested only twice right now. The thing is, we work with a very privileged group, women's rights schools, because we ask for a commitment of schools, like they have to commit the whole school team, so everybody, headmasters, all the teachers, everybody around, and so also learners themselves, parents, the community, everybody has to be on board, and it takes about a year before everybody knows they want to be on board. Once they're on board, we ask for 2 more years of commitment. So that's a very privileged group we're working with. So that in that context, the self-assessment instrument seems to work. And asking for action, well, actually, it's the basic question. It's just a definition of a children's rights school. It's that people are wondering the whole time, what am I doing in any aspect of school life? To fully realize human rights of children everywhere, close by and far away, and also in the future. So that's our basic question. So it's very action oriented, and the whole system is actually falls within this action framework because it's also easier to measure, and it's a very motivational approach, I think, to children's rights education, at least, that it's very action oriented. Although we do not want to lose everything that's not as material, for instance, like their behavior and attitudes and conviction. In Belgium, it's a bit hard to talk about values because it's a very, very loaded term. So it can get very spiritual and mean-spirited, and so that's why we don't use the word. But I can imagine that in other contexts it's perfectly possible to work. We just don't use the word, even though sometimes we mean it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'd also like to pick up on another point that you made, Kaylin, about the cultural environment, and like you were talking about, some cultures are it's easier to express your ideas, others are more conformist. A question to both of you: in your work, are you focusing, Fiona? Are you focusing only on Belgium, or is it an international project? And the same for you, Kaylin. I mean, is the experiences you were talking about, does that come from Romania, or because this is obviously something that is a big concern with the Sustainable Development Goals, trying to produce a monitoring framework that in theory is applicable everywhere in the world is a huge challenge and raises a lot of concerns. So perhaps you could mention any comments or perspectives you have on that side of things and from your experiences. Kaylin, perhaps you can start.
Yes, I can start. Yeah. Well, we have, of course, most of our work done here in Romania, but here also we work with different types of cultural environments within Romania, because there's a big difference between a school in the capital city or in big cities and a place, in the rural area where you have also sometimes, various minorities living. So it makes a difference. But we also have a lot of experience in other countries, in other parts of the world. We've worked a lot in European projects with partners from different countries in Europe. Also in places like South Caucasus, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia. A lot now also in Kosovo, and recently in Libya also. Yes, we have seen that there are differences, but I have to say that I am very strongly, promoting in the same time with the idea of cultural sensitivity. Also, a strong believer in the idea of the universality of human rights and democracy principles. So just wanted to make it clear. And then I think that what can bring a difference in this field in general of education. One of the things that we're promoting is the idea of partnerships between schools from different countries, we've had several projects and activities on this, and we are now working on with the Council of Europe in supporting schools in Kosovo to develop partnerships with schools in Germany, also related to a process of forced return of people from Kosovo who are living in Germany to Kosovo. And we are really hoping that this can be also developed. And we've been in contact with colleagues also from the British Council, who have a very interesting project called Connecting Classrooms, and where I think this kind of partnership, all this, there is a lot of very important potential for learning in this context. And we are also now to find ways to a proper the kind of activities learning and in terms of this kind of multidimensional learning, not just knowledge acquisition. And I can share, I think, a link, some resources that have been developed and used for this, but all is just a part of the things. I think you should be able to find here if I did not.
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
You can see it there, thank you. Great. And Fiona, anything else? Anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, sure.
Question?
No, our experience is in Belgium, even a small part of Belgium, Flemish-speaking part, Dutch-speaking part. But of course, we're all very supportive of the idea, the concept of universality of human rights. So that's important. Now we really want to apply universal design, yeah, which means that we want to be as inclusive as possible in everything we do, not just monitoring. Which means to us. That we always want to develop anything we do in a participatory way, which means including everybody who has a stake. So everybody who will affect it in some way by what we do. So for monitoring, that's what I was referring to earlier. We're having a pilot project with children who are formulating indicators for children's rights. And that's just one example, because of course age is one criterion. We work with self-identification categories where everybody can just tell us or write or however they want to express themselves out in a group or individually how they view themselves in terms of, for instance, their sex, their gender, and their age, of course, disability or not, belonging to a minority or not, which type of minority. And so we have like 10, I think, groups where everybody can always indicate also Q, as in questioning, and then I don't want to answer, I don't know how to answer. Yeah. Which was interesting because I've just concluded a project in Indonesia with these self-identification groups where I noticed that some questions were actually very taboo, which prompted me to develop new questions with the children in Indonesia themselves. For instance, the question about not having a religion, that's completely taboo, because in Indonesia everybody is supposed to have a religion. Also the question about disability or not, also taboo. Here in Belgium we notice there's a taboo regarding gender, for instance. When I explain, Q, it's questioning, you don't know yet, or you're doubting, or you're in doubt or something, everybody gets very giddy and all that. I didn't have that in Asia, for instance. So that's a universal thing as well. But when we process all those results, we know at least if what we do is acceptable to certain groups of people without having to label them ourselves. So that's one way we try to implement to have a universal design of our work. I'm not sure if that helps, but yeah.
Great, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'd like to follow up on that in a minute, but maybe just, Catherine, if you want, is there anything you want to add or ask to the discussion we've had so far?
No, I think people have mentioned different links and topics, and Callan's already said, yes, he's happy to share things afterwards. But I think it would be really useful to get some of or be able to see some of the documents or follow things up if possible. There's all sorts of things I'd love to say, but we haven't got enough time.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. If after the discussion you're able, both of you, Kaylin and Fiona, to share all of the links and these different frameworks and approaches that you've mentioned so far with us, that would be really, really appreciated, so that we can include that, because at the moment we're doing a literature review of what's out there already, and trying to draw on that, as well as the live discussions we're having with practitioners. So that would be wonderful if you can share those. I just wanted to move on to a question, maybe to become a little bit more concrete. Whether you yourselves, through the experiences you've had, whether you have any suggestions for possible targets and indicators for transformative education for global citizenship, or whether, so if you have any suggestions for targets or indicators that you think would be important to include or take into consideration. And also, you both mentioned the importance of participatory defining of these indicators and these targets. Whether you have any suggestions as to how this participatory process can actually be implemented, how it can take place as well. If you don't feel that you would want to suggest targets and indicators specifically.
Kalen, you want to go first because I have to think.
Yeah, okay. Well, I also have to say that I will have a lot more to share on that maybe within a month. I hope it's not too late for you, because on, well, actually even a little bit more, on the 12th, 13th of November, we will have a discussion on these issues with the colleagues, and soon after that we'll be able to share a document. Well, now I have to say that I've been insisting in this work we're doing on related to indicators for democratic culture and intercultural dialogue to include global issues, and because it's not so obvious, not everybody sees the close and direct connection between what we are supposed to do in schools in Europe and the global issues. And I think that this is a risk to see this as separate areas, to talk about education for democracy and separately on global education. And I think that this approach based on global citizenship and integrating global issues into everything that's related to education for democracy, I think is the best approach. So then I would just raise this issue for discussion if the framework you are thinking about is consistent with this or not, or if you're thinking of having a separate framework only for that, because I think I tend to think about to prefer the option with looking at this as a general thing, including human rights and democracy and global issues altogether. And now we're also discussing with colleagues at the Ministry of Education in Romania, which are about to make some changes in the curriculum. And it's also very important to bring global issues together. I mean, for example, there is a tendency to speak about intercultural education also, looking also only to minority issues at local level, and not to consider the global dimension. And we also believe that it's more appropriate and useful to have these dimensions also integrated when you speak about intercultural education. But as I said, in terms of specific suggestions, if you have something that I'll be very glad to give feedback on, and I'll be able to share this framework that we are working on within about a month.
Great, wonderful, thank you. Fiona?
Yeah.
Anything you would like to add?
Yeah, no, not much actually this time, because we're still we at the moment we use a framework actually drafted for yeah, you might say global education. We call it education on inequality in the world, something like that. So at the macro level, but we're not really satisfied with that, because for human rights education it's a bit it's too limited actually. So we at the moment we're working on that, and we don't have anything finished yet. We started from a list of our core competencies for learners, for trainers, and for trained trainers. The trainers 3 lists actually for those 6 dimensions of what learning transformative learning should be according to us. So we start from there, so we know what we want as an end goal. But to have the indicators ready, no, we're not there yet. I'm really sorry. But once we have them, I have to write something in English about it, so I will send it to you as well. But it will be only in November actually.
Okay.
And then in terms of yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
No, that would be great if you can send them when you have them ready in November.
Sure. We
Go
try to
ahead.
integrate them also with all the other educations, but that's it's a bit difficult. You know, there's a lot of semantics involved, and we try to keep out of those. But yeah, the words can mean something, so that's why it's taking a bit longer than we wanted. Now about participatory processes, we're very small, but even without. When you don't take that into consideration, we always believe in quality above quantity. So actually, what we always do is work with small groups. Of course, the whole selection procedure in itself is already a whole exercise in is it participatory or not. But once the group is there, we just meet throughout the year for a couple of times, establish some trust, some safe environment, and then we work with them. And then the results we try to multiply, and then we test that in other environments, and that's how we work. But it's a very intensive and time-intense method, and I realize that's actually impossible to do at a global scale unless everybody is doing the same thing. But in our experience, it's the only thing we trust, something that comes out of there, because you know participation it's used all the time and it doesn't mean anything anymore to us. It's a very real meaning, and we want to honor it. You know, it goes. It's not just about voicing an opinion. It's about being able to goes from being able to form an opinion, which means being informed, all the way up to having an impact on the result, the end result. And the last one is we have like 8 levels actually, or 9 levels, and or it's more like a wheel because everything is interconnected. We have a visualization of that concept. I can send that one to you, but it goes up to all the way up to having a impact on the result, which people have to recognize themselves as well. And there we see that a lot of projects that are called participatory are, in our eyes, actually, in our view, actually, just fake participation. Yeah. So that's a big risk. It's better not to call it participatory if it's not all that. Maybe we're too radical in that, but it's one of our pet peeves. Actually.
Okay. Thank you. I mean it's a really good point. I think it leads in really well to the final question that I wanted to address here with you today. Is that obviously the participative nature of developing these kind of indicators and targets is extremely important. Trying to set these global goals. And often I think practitioners feel that they don't have much of a voice, that it's often the policy makers that are trying to set these frameworks, and they end up looking at what is, like we said before, what is easiest to measure, and practitioners feel that they have to work to these rigid frameworks that they find very difficult to actually apply practically, or they don't find particularly useful for improving their work or evaluating what they're doing. So just as the final question, what would both of you see as the main risks and opportunities for monitoring the way in which education transforms how people think and act individually and collectively? So after all the discussion that we've had here today, what would you pinpoint as possible risks in this process of trying to create a new monitoring framework that is more appropriate for transformative learning? And what, on the other hand, would you see as the opportunities that we should use in the coming years for developing this?
Yeah, I can start with, for me, the 2 main risks are the quantification, the mere quantification, but it's of course, you started by saying that, you're narrowing down, and then you start doing things just to get the targets instead of, looking at the whole board, having that. So and having a merely quantified approach, I understand why it's necessary to be able to quantify, because otherwise you can't compare. But at the same time, it's a very, very poor way of measuring. And then what we were talking about, this lack of a truly participatory approach to developing and having feedback on everything. And yeah, I think that's a big risk, because we really need the input not just from us practitioners, but also from people our target groups. That's even more important, maybe. how they feel about this. Those are the main risks, I think.
Thank you. Okay, let's stick for the risks for the moment, and then we'll come on to the opportunities to end on a positive note. So, Kaylin, maybe you can. Are there any risks that you can foresee?
Well, from experiences we had, I can say that this emphasis, I totally agree with Fiona that just saying that you have a participatory approach doesn't mean that you actually are doing it the right way. And we have seen a lot of very superficial use of methods that was and structures that were supposed to be participatory. And so on the other side, if you leave it open totally and let teachers or educators or trainers to decide sometimes all they can do, you also end up with sometimes very poor results and superficial approach. So I tend to think that it's very useful to have a balance, to provide some kind of framework and structure, but which allows for a lot of elements to be filled in through a truly participatory approach. And that there are ways, I think, to do that, and to have to make this really function. I believe that it's very important, but maybe now I'm speaking about opportunities, is to include a very strong elements of self-reflection and reflection on the learning. So it's not enough to have activities which are participatory and which lead to outcomes that you can assess looking at the products and or the process, but it's important to have this element of reflection, which is, I think, the only one which can help go deeper and avoid this risk of a superficial approach. And for example, one risk I've seen in activities well intended, for example, related to education concerning the environment, is to stimulate at children this genuine commitment for saving the planet, but not combined with the serious understanding of what are responsibilities of citizens, what they can do, what their community can do, what policymakers need to do at different levels, and not just shout slogans, but really have clear politically based understanding of what the current situation and what should be done and what can be done, and then to deduce from that what kind of actions they need to take, and it's reasonable for them to take. So for me, that this is not useful to do this kind of education, which can often end up in manipulation, even if children or young people feel good when they do this. But you need to go beyond that to really get to be effective in terms of educational process.
Great, yeah, thank you. And Fiona, anything you want to mention about possible opportunities for creating new frameworks?
Well, actually, I see the thing we're doing right now as a big opportunity, because I really would like to thank you for asking for input, which is very participatory. So thank you for that. I think this is the moment to make sure that your monitoring framework is not based on will not give a feeling of failure to the people who are being assessed, both learners and trainers. By setting up a monitoring framework, you can get to that point where people are getting demotivated, whereas for transformative learning, we want to have the opposite effect. So we can use monitoring for that. I think that's a big opportunity right now to take into account right now to integrate that in your new framework, so that it's like we try to do at our small level in a very modest way, to have these action-based suggestions when you use it. It doesn't have to be self-assessment, but when the assessment is there, then wherever you end up, there's something you can do. And there's something you are encouraged to do, and that is, I think, education for active citizenship and also human rights education and all the other educations. It should. I think that's, of course, that's more an internal thing, so it's not really an opportunity. But I just wanted to say it anyway. So.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I'm just aware of the time now. It's already just gone past 2 o'clock. So I don't know. Maybe just any final thoughts or comments you would like to mention that we haven't raised yet? I mean, obviously you can also follow up, because this has just been, it really scratched the surface. It's just starting the discussion, and we'd be really happy if you can follow up with things anything in writing that you feel you haven't had time to mention here afterwards. But just 1-2 minutes, if there's anything you'd like to mention here, either any of you or Catherine. Yeah, Kaylin?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, of course, I want to continue to be in touch with you all on these issues, and also interested in learning more about what you do, and I'd be glad to share what we do, but also look forward to receiving any kind of ideas or documents which you are working on.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Catherine or Fiona, any final comments?
Yeah, just maybe take into account the long term. So monitoring should never be just baseline and then one-off. It should be long term. And it makes it very difficult to have really research on that, like scientific research, because you'll never know the exact causal link between your educational activities and then the way in which people are 20 years afterwards. But still, I think it's really important to try. That's that, and I agree with Kaylin about sharing documents and things you're working on, and of course, yeah, if we can follow up on this in writing, then I really, of course, you're very welcome to ask me any input, and the other way around. And I just want to say thank you to you all. I'm really sorry, but I really have to go because I have to go and give my own webinar in half an hour.
Okay.
Thank you very much for everything, and we'll talk to you later, okay?
Wonderful. Thank you. So great to have you here today. Okay.
Bye.
Okay, and the others maybe can stay on. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Kaylin and Catherine, if you... Okay, you're still here? Yeah, and Kaylin.
Yes.
Okay, great. Catherine, did you want to... Was there anything you wanted to add before we finish today?
I think it's been really useful, and I think it's started to just show the wealth of activity which is going on out there and which we can draw on. I'm also feeling that the document that we produce as a result of this research is actually going to open up far more questions than it's probably going to answer, which to a certain extent is inevitable. But it feels as if there's a momentum around looking at different approaches to monitoring and evaluation, which moves away from what we've done in the past, which I think is all good. I think there's a lot that we can share from working together, and I'm really quite excited to be part of that process.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, me too. I mean, it's really been interesting to hear about what you're working on, Kaylin, and what Fiona's doing, and to see that there is, like Catherine said, this momentum for looking at alternative ways of assessing learning. So we're really excited to continue with this research project and to incorporate all of your input. And like we've said, Catherine will write up the notes from this discussion and circulate it to you and also to the wider DARE network. So please feel free to add any further input that you may have in writing. And then the second stage of our research is also to feedback the responses that we've got so far from practitioners to a wider group of stakeholders. So we'd also be happy to involve you in that survey, or your institutions in responding to that survey as well at a later stage, which will probably be more in November time. Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely keep in touch and keep the discussions going, and keep you informed of how the research is going as well. So, I mean, as far as, yeah, thank you very much on behalf of DEEP for your input. And Ramon, I don't know if you want to mention anything before we sign off.
Nothing from my side. Like, I'm very happy that we had this e-academy, and yeah, I also enjoyed very much the process and the results that we got from it. So thank you, DEEP, for making this type of researches and for involving us in the way that you are doing.
I just want to add one thing I forgot to mention. Is it possible? But I can do it also in written. Is that we are now involved in a research on the impact of the mobility activities at European level. Mobilities for young people, and also related to studies and other types. And I would be, if it's possible, I would share a link where people you might know who would be interested to join could also fill in a questionnaire, people who have had experiences of mobilities within Europe in general. Is this okay to ask? Yeah, okay.
That would be great, yeah. Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you very much once again, and yeah, look forward to continuing to collaborate with you in the next few months.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.